A flight attendant tried to humiliate Sylvester Stallone for flying first class with a young black boy. What happened next silenced the entire plane. From being accused of sitting in the wrong cabin, to facing public judgment, to a captain stepping in, and a powerful apology that no one saw coming. This story has more than one shocking twist. If you believe in standing up for what's right, and that respect has no age or color, this video is for you. Watch till the end, and if this moment moved you even a little, drop a comment with your thoughts. We read every one. And hey, we are almost at our first 100 subscribers. So if you believe more people should see stories like this, hit that subscribe button and help us grow. Now, let's begin this unforgettable journey. The morning heat hung heavy outside Dallas Fort Worth International Airport as travelers hustled through the terminal like fish in a fast current. There were executives in Navy suits shouting into Bluetooth earpieces, sunburnt families dragging overstuffed bags toward security, and airport staff weaving through the tide in high-visibility vests. Inside all that chaos, barely noticed, walked an old man and a boy, moving slower than the crowd, but with a quiet purpose that seemed unshakable. Sylvester Stallone, gray-haired now, a little stooped at the shoulders, wore a worn leather jacket, faded jeans, and well-traveled boots. His face, though aged, still carried the kind of bone-deep strength that couldn't be bought or faked. He didn't have bodyguards. No fanfare followed him. He moved like a man who didn't expect to be recognized and didn't care either way. Beside him walked a young boy, no more than 10, holding Stallone's hand like it was the only solid thing in his world. The boy's name was Malik. He was black, with skin the deep, warm brown of polished mahogany and eyes that were too quiet for a child his age. His white button-up shirt had a stain near the hem, and his sneakers had seen better days. Yet he walked with his chin up. Though every so often he glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone to tell him he didn't belong. They reached Gate C-19, where Flight 147 to New York was preparing to board. A few people did double takes as Stallone stepped into the first-class priority line, but nobody said anything. The gate agent, a young woman named Chloe, smiled warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Stallone," she said. "We've got you and your grandson in seats, 1A and 1B today." Stallone nodded and leaned down to speak to Malik. "You ready for your first real flight, champ?" Malik gave a tiny smile. "I guess." Chloe scanned the tickets and waved them through. "Welcome aboard," she said. Malik hesitated just a second before following Stallone down the jet bridge. His small hand never let go. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin gleamed with polished surfaces and soft leather seats. The kind of place where conversation stayed low, and sparkling water was poured before takeoff. Carla, the senior flight attendant on duty, stood near the galley reviewing the passenger list on her tablet. She was sharp, put together, and carried herself with the controlled grace of someone who had worked in premium cabins long enough to expect a certain kind of passenger. So when she looked up and saw Stallone and Malik entering, her expression flickered. Her eyes locked on Malik, not Stallone, and something in her gaze stiffened. "Excuse me," she said, stepping into their path, her voice calm but cool. "This is first class." Stallone paused, then tilted his head. "Yeah, that's what the tickets say." Carla smiled in the way people do when they don't mean it. "Of course. Sometimes gate agents make errors with seating. May I see your boarding passes?" Stallone handed them over without flinching. Carla scanned them, and everything checked out. Seats 1A and 1B. Names matched. Still, her eyes went back to Malik. "Is this your grandson?" she asked. Stallone gave her a steady look. He's not. He's with me." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to say everything Carla didn't. She stepped aside with a tight smile and said, "Right this way, sir." They made their way to the front row, settled in quietly. Malik sat by the window, eyes wide as he stared out at the tarmac. Stallone leaned back, adjusting his jacket, then reached over and ruffled the boy's hair. "You're doing great," he whispered. Malik nodded, but his fingers gripped the armrest tight. Carla stood back in the galley but kept glancing their way. Something about the pairing nagged at her. Maybe it was the fact that Stallone didn't look like a man flying with a child. Maybe it was that Malik looked nothing like him, black, quiet, wary. And yet, there they were, sitting like they belonged. Maybe it was something uglier that she couldn't quite admit to herself. A few minutes later, she approached again, crouching slightly to speak softly. "Mr. Stallone," she said, her tone smooth and practiced. "Just a quick note. In first class, we try to maintain a certain atmosphere. Some passengers expect consistency in the premium experience, especially when traveling for business." Stallone blinked slowly. "What are you trying to say?" Carla looked toward Malik, then back. "It's just that sometimes, when passengers see untraditional pairings, they may have concerns. We just ask for sensitivity in these situations." Stallone's expression didn't change. "You mean because I'm white, and he's not?" Carla's eyes widened. "No, I mean, of course not. We just—" Stallone raised a hand, stopping her words in their tracks. "You don't need to explain. You've already said enough." He leaned forward slightly. "That boy's name is Malik. He's 10 years old. He lost both parents before he turned 8. He's had more birthdays in foster care than I've had roles. And I brought him here because no one else would." Carla stood awkwardly, shifting her weight. "I understand, but we also have to consider the comfort of other guests." Stallone looked around the cabin. "No one said a word. You're the only one uncomfortable." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came. Stallone continued, quieter now. "You see a kid who doesn't fit your idea of first class. You see an old man who doesn't fit it either. That's not on us. That's on you." Carla stiffened. "If you're going to be confrontational, I may have to notify the captain." "Go ahead," Stallone said. "But before you do, ask yourself, if Malik was blonde and blue-eyed, would we be having this conversation?" Passengers nearby began to take notice. Some looked away. Others glanced toward the front of the cabin with uneasy expressions. A businessman in 2C paused his typing. A woman across the aisle turned down the volume on her earbuds. The air changed. Not loud, not tense, but heavier. Carla stood frozen, her posture still perfect, but her composure unraveling. Stallone turned back to Malik and whispered something in his ear. The boy nodded, still looking out the window, but now his hand was in Stallone's again. That one small gesture, simple, unremarkable, carried more power than any argument could. It was the gesture of family, of trust, of earned love. And for the first time, Carla saw it not as something out of place, but something painfully true. In that quiet moment, the truth didn't shout. It just sat there, waiting to be seen. By the time the plane began taxiing toward the runway, the unease in the cabin had thickened into something nearly visible. The engines hummed low beneath the floor, but it was the silence above that held the weight. Malik shifted in his seat, small hands in his lap, eyes flickering from the seat belt sign to the window. He hadn't said a word since the last exchange, but his body language had changed. Shoulders drawn inward, feet no longer swinging, a quiet shrinking. Sylvester Stallone watched him, jaw tight. He hadn't said anything more to Carla either, but his silence had taken on a gravity that even the most inattentive passengers could feel. Carla stood at the galley like she always did, posture straight, uniform crisp. But her hands, resting on the tray table, were clenched tighter than she realized. Her heart beat a little faster now, not from confrontation, but from something less tangible. Exposure. She felt eyes, and not the kind that admired her professionalism or her poise. The kind that asked questions. The kind that saw cracks where there had once been armor. 10 minutes into the flight, once the cabin crew had completed their safety check and the plane had leveled off above the clouds, Carla moved back down the aisle. The lights had dimmed slightly, giving everything that muted early evening glow. She stopped beside Stallone's row again, her voice low. "Mr. Stallone, I've received comments from other passengers. Some are uncomfortable." Stallone turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. "Uncomfortable about what?" She hesitated. "About the presence of ideological or social statements in a space intended to be neutral, a space meant for comfort." "Are you referring to the boy sitting beside me?" he asked. "I'm referring to the dynamic, yes. To the overall presence. It's been noted by more than one person." "You've gotten complaints," he repeated, "and instead of addressing them with grace, you came here to disguise your discomfort as policy." Carla stiffened. "I'm simply doing my job, sir. We have protocols." "You're not following protocol," Stallone said evenly. "You're reacting to what you think this looks like, to a narrative in your head, not to reality." She opened her mouth, but he didn't stop. "What you see is an old man, past his prime, right? You think I don't belong here unless I'm in a tuxedo and walking a red carpet. And then you see a black boy beside me and assume something's off. You never stop to think we might just be two people trying to find peace, trying to build something that resembles family." Carla's jaw tightened. Passengers in nearby rows were now clearly listening. Some were leaning slightly forward. One man across the aisle had turned his phone slightly toward the aisle, thumb hovering above the record button, unsure whether he was witnessing a moment worth capturing. Another woman 2 rows back exchanged glances with her husband, and he subtly removed one earbud. The air had shifted again. Stallone remained seated, his voice soft but deliberate. "I didn't bring this boy into first class to make a statement. I brought him here because, for the first time in his life, he deserves to feel like he belongs somewhere other than the back of the line." Carla's professional mask held, but the edges frayed. Her response came too fast. "I'll have to notify the captain if this continues. We can't allow individual actions to disturb cabin harmony." "Harmony," Stallone repeated, almost like it tasted wrong in his mouth. "You mean appearances. You want everything to look a certain way, even if it means telling a 10-year-old he's not welcome in a seat that was paid for, with a heart that's already been broken more times than you can count." His words weren't loud, but they carried. Carla stepped back, but not before muttering, "Sir, please remain calm." "I am calm," he said. "It's just that calm looks different when you're done apologizing for existing." Malik turned away from the window and looked up at Stallone. The boy didn't speak, but his eyes held something raw, a mix of gratitude and fear, of wanting to disappear and needing to be seen. Stallone put an arm around him, a quiet, unshakable gesture that needed no words. Carla stood frozen, torn between what her training told her to do and what her gut had started to feel. She turned on her heel and returned to the galley, tapping her tablet more forcefully than needed. "Nicole," she said to the younger flight attendant beside her, "I need you to come forward with me. We may have a situation that requires escalation." Nicole blinked. "Is it about the man and the kid?" "Passenger 2 is being resistant. There may be a disruption if we don't establish control." Nicole hesitated. "But they're not doing anything. He's been respectful. Quiet." Carla didn't answer right away. She felt it then. That slow, awful realization that her younger colleague didn't see what she saw. Or rather, that Nicole saw clearly. And Carla was the one standing behind foggy glass. "Come on," she muttered. "We're doing this by the book." 5 minutes later, the cockpit door opened and Captain Morales stepped out. He was in his 50s, graying at the temples, with the kind of face that had weathered 1,000 takeoffs and just as many human complications. He didn't move fast, but his presence was unmistakable, like a pillar walking the aisle. When he reached the galley, Carla stepped forward quickly. "Captain, Passenger 2 is disregarding crew instruction. He's challenging cabin expectations. I've asked for cooperation regarding an unusual seating situation and—" Morales held up a hand. "Let me speak to him directly." He walked calmly to row 1 and looked down at Stallone. "Mr. Stallone, I understand there's been some disagreement about your seating arrangement?" Stallone nodded, eyes steady. "Your crew member here asked if the boy sitting beside me belonged in first class. When I told her he's with me, she suggested I move him elsewhere to maintain the cabin's atmosphere. I said no." The captain looked at Malik, then back at Stallone. "And has there been any incident? Any raised voices, threats, disrespect?" "None," Stallone replied. "Just clarity." Captain Morales glanced toward Carla, who opened her mouth but said nothing. Nicole, just behind her, looked down. The captain turned back to Stallone. "Well, I appreciate your calm, Mr. Stallone. And as far as I'm concerned, if a seat is paid for, and no one's disrupting the peace, that's all the atmosphere we need." Stallone gave a respectful nod. "Thank you, Captain." The captain looked around the cabin. Several passengers quickly turned away. A few, however, didn't bother hiding their agreement. Morales returned to the cockpit. Carla stood in place, now clearly alone in her stance. Her authority, which had once felt like armor, now felt like a weight. She looked back at the boy. Malik was sipping orange juice, still silent, but more upright now, more sure. She caught Stallone watching her. His expression wasn't smug. It wasn't angry. It was the look of a man who had carried weight for decades and had grown tired of lifting other people's discomfort too. Carla returned to the galley. The tray she tried to arrange slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. She didn't curse. She didn't cry. She just stared at her reflection in the microwave door, seeing not a steward of comfort, but a gatekeeper of prejudice. And for the first time in a long time, she wondered whether she had truly earned her own seat. By the time the aircraft reached cruising altitude over Kentucky, the hum of engines was the only steady sound inside the cabin. First class had returned to its typical quiet, but something had undeniably shifted. The ambient calm no longer felt like luxury. It felt like aftermath. Carla stood near the galley, arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes fixed on the floor. She wasn't organizing the cart. She wasn't preparing drinks. She wasn't doing anything. The certainty that had guided her through over a decade of flying, polished posture, protocol adherence, calm dominance over the space, had eroded, quietly but completely. She had never expected to be challenged so directly, so publicly. But what unsettled her most wasn't the confrontation. It was the silence that followed, because in that silence she had heard herself. At the front, Malik was laughing softly now. Just a boy's chuckle, shy but real. Stallone had opened a pack of peanuts and was pretending to be confused by the packaging. "Do you need a degree in engineering to open this thing?" he grumbled with mock irritation. Malik giggled again and showed him the tear line. Carla heard it from the galley and felt something twist in her chest. It was such a normal moment, a small one. But it didn't belong to the narrative she'd carried in her mind earlier, the one where something was wrong with that picture. That laugh, pure and unguarded, shattered it entirely. She checked her tablet out of habit, pretending to do something official. But her eyes wandered to the corner of the screen where cabin messages had begun piling up. 3 different passengers had submitted anonymous compliments for Seat 1B, noting the boy's good behavior and the grace of the older gentleman with him. One message read simply, "Thank you for showing what dignity really looks like." Another read, "I hope my son grows up to be like that boy." Carla's throat tightened. She felt a wave of heat crawl up her neck. The plane began its slow descent into JFK, and with it came a soft chime, and the captain's voice, firm but warm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morales. We're beginning our descent into New York. We appreciate your patience during today's journey. On behalf of American Airlines, I also want to remind everyone of something simple. Respect and decency never go out of style. If someone's presence bothers you more than their behavior, maybe it's time to look in a different mirror." There was no ambiguity. Everyone in that cabin knew what he meant. Carla did too. After the landing, as the aircraft rolled toward the gate, she stood frozen in place, staring out the small galley window. The New York skyline shimmered in the distance, but she didn't see it. She saw the moment she'd first stepped in front of Stallone at the beginning of the flight. She remembered her tone, her words, the implication in her voice when she'd questioned Malik's place. She remembered the way Malik's shoulders had hunched, the way his small hand had curled tighter into Stallone's. And she remembered Stallone's eyes, tired, wise, unwavering. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't insulted her, but he'd held up a mirror that she wasn't ready for. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began standing, stretching, pulling down bags. Carla stepped out slowly, unsure what to do. She didn't have a script for this part. There was no procedure for undoing the kind of mistake she'd made. As passengers filed past, she nodded politely, thanked them with a mechanical smile, but her eyes kept drifting forward to row 1. Stallone stood, helping Malik with his small backpack. They weren't rushing. They didn't have to. Their calm in the midst of so much had become an anchor for others. And then, before they turned to walk out, Carla stepped forward. "Mr. Stallone," she said, her voice no longer sharp or composed. It was soft, raw. "May I have a moment?" He turned, Malik beside him. His expression was neutral but not closed. Carla looked at the boy. "Malik," she said gently, "you handled today better than most adults I've ever met. And I'm sorry." She paused, eyes starting to gloss over. "I assumed things. I spoke to you both like you were out of place when really, I was the one not seeing clearly." Stallone studied her face for a long second, then nodded once. "It takes strength to face your own voice," he said. "That boy's heard a lot worse from people who never looked him in the eye afterward." Carla took a breath, struggling to steady herself. "You didn't owe me grace, but you gave it anyway. And that taught me more in 3 hours than I learned in 10 years of training." She looked down, then met Malik's eyes. "You deserve every good thing that comes your way, kid, and more." Without thinking, she lowered herself slightly, just enough to be eye level with him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't for show. It was just human. "I won't forget you," she whispered. Malik smiled, small and quiet. "Okay." She stood, blinking back a tear. Stallone extended a hand, not coldly, not as a gesture of victory, but as a quiet offering. She took it. As they exited, other passengers gave subtle nods, some pats on Stallone's back, one woman touching Malik's shoulder lightly, as if to say, "You did nothing wrong." The boy's eyes lit up brighter with each step. The world outside still had a long way to go, but in that moment, the hallway to the jet bridge felt lighter. 2 weeks later, in a quiet apartment in Queens, Carla sat at her kitchen table. No makeup, no uniform, just a plain t-shirt and a mug of tea gone cold. Her phone was recording. She stared into the camera for a long while before speaking. "My name is Carla Williams. I've worked in aviation for 13 years. I've served celebrities, CEOs, politicians. I've memorized more policy than I can list. But a few weeks ago, I forgot the most basic rule of all. Look with your heart before you speak with your mouth." She reached over and picked up a small item from the table. It was a folded note, scribbled on the back of a boarding pass. In Stallone's handwriting, it read, "The seat doesn't make the man, but how you treat him shows the kind of person you are." Carla looked back into the camera. "I judged a man by his age. I judged a child by his skin. And I did it with the kind of tone that gets passed off as professionalism. But it wasn't. It was fear, assumption. And when he challenged me, he did it without raising his voice. That was the loudest lesson I've ever heard." She paused, then gave a soft smile. "To Mr. Stallone, and to Malik, thank you. You didn't just sit in first class. You reminded the rest of us how to act like it." She stopped recording, exhaled, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was flying towards something better, not in altitude, but in truth. Back in Manhattan, Stallone and Malik sat on a bench in Central Park, feeding pigeons. Malik had a library book in his lap. Stallone leaned in close. "What's that word mean?" he asked. Malik grinned. "Resilience," Stallone nodded. "Good word." The boy smiled. "I like the sound of it." Stallone looked out at the lake, peaceful and still. "Yeah, me too, kid. Me too." And just like that, the world spun on. Not changed by one flight, but maybe, just maybe, nudged in the right direction by 2 passengers who refused to be unseen.